When it comes to Christmassy themed video games, there aren't many out there, and even less good ones. What surprised me was that Neon Studios for 2 consecutive years had put out a Christmas game series called Santa Claus JR, but is it any good though? Well, not really. I do give Neon Studios credit for trying to make an enjoyable Christmas themed video game, and 2 of them at that. Ho 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 ho, but seriously, since it is the season for redemption, let's give this series a fair chance. So let's pop in the first cards and see what kind of crazy Christmassy story this title has in store for us. The story is, we start off with, it's about to be honest, I haven't got a clue what this game story is. We start off with a slideshow of images trying to tell a story, but they're so vague that you might as well just make one up, or just forget there's even a story to this game. But hey, all you really need to know about this game is, it's a Christmassy themed platformer, so, Christmas aside, is this game any good as a platformer? Well, there is almost some solid platforming to be had here if not for this game's inept jumping system. Your character moves and takes off from his jump as you would expect him to, but our hero lands disappointingly short of where you would expect him to land, and that makes trying to work out the distance needed to jump on enemies more difficult than it needed to be. I never got used to the timing needed to jump on enemies, but I did figure it out for jumping from platform to platform, so that's something. The levels themselves are fairly solid, and they each offer fresh challenges that keep you on your toes. And while you're on your toes, here's a few things to get you started. Right from the beginning, you can choose how many life bars you have, 25 candy canes gives you an extra life, Christmas trees act as checkpoints, and collecting presents, well, I haven't got a clue what collecting them does. I've gotten almost to the end of this game and I still couldn't figure out what collecting them does. But this is one Christmas mystery we're going to have to leave unsolved. The graphics in this game are okay, I guess, but when you compare them to other Game Boy Color games, they are at best average. But here's something to consider. This game only came out in Europe in late 2001. At the beginning of that year, the Game Boy Advance was also released around the world. So it's fair to say that 2001 was the last big year for the Game Boy Color, before Nintendo handed over the handheld Game & Torch to the Game Boy Advance. Sure, Game Boy Color games were still being made up to 2003, and Shantae, released in 2002, is considered to be one of the last best Game Boy Color games, and also one of the best looking 8-bit games of all time. I know it's unfair to compare these two games, but when you see what WayForward was able to achieve with this outdated hardware in 2002, you kind of expect more of Santa Claus JR, which came out in late 2001. Sure, there are 1 or 2 stages that do look half decent, but most of the time the graphics in this game serve their purpose. And it's kind of the same deal with the music. It does its job, but you wouldn't want to listen to it on its own, and plus it gets repetitive after a while, so maybe that's the reason why there's never been a sound test included in either of these games. Most of this game's flaws can be forgiven, and after all, this is an obscure Christmas game released only in Europe, so you gotta set expectations accordingly. But there is one major problem in this game I cannot forgive, and that is the broken password system. I don't mind passwords, and in the age of smartphones where you just take a snapshot instead of writing them down, it's not really an issue now. But don't bother keeping track of passwords in this game because they won't do you any good. Passwords in this game not only track what level you're up to, they also track your lives and health. Here's an example of this password system at its best. You see here I start the last level I was on with only half of one of my life bars and no lives. All it takes from this moment is one hit and then yes, game over. How are the passwords in this game helpful? I might as well just start from the beginning again instead of using this game's stupid password system. So, Santa Claus JR for the Game Boy Color is a bit of a bust. Gameplay, graphics and music are all okay I guess, but this game's broken password system is unforgivable, and because of that I have no choice but to give this game the thumbs down. So let's move on to the next title in this series, and here's hoping for some holiday joy with Santa Claus JR Advance for the Game Boy Advance. Santa Claus JR Advance is yet more Christmassy platform action. As usual with this series, collecting 100 candy canes gives you an extra life, Christmas trees act as checkpoints, and at first glance, other than this game looking prettier than its predecessor, it doesn't seem to do anything that different. But this game does have one thing that sets it apart from the previous game, and that is the stars you collect. Instead of power-ups, you collect stars, and these stars can be used on the fly to help you out. 3 stars allows you to do a double jump, 10 stars gives you an extra heart, and 20 stars freezes everything on the screen. Freezing everything is just a waste of stars when you can just jump on or jump past enemies. Extra hearts is a good use of your stars, and you will use a good chunk of them just for that. But save most of your stars because the single biggest use of them will be to do a double jump. Serious. You have to collect stars in order to be able to do a double jump. That is the most stupidest thing I have seen in any game I've ever played. Okay, so we're not getting off to a good start with this game. Let's sidestep for a moment and try to find some positives. The graphics in this game are pretty good, and what makes them even more impressive is that Santa Claus JR Advance is a first gen Game Boy Advance title and a hell of a leap from its predecessor. Visually this game invokes a dark, cold and slightly twisted Christmas. But why is everything on a slant? I'm serious, look. The in-game lettering, trees, signs, our hero, and just about everything else in this game is on a slant. Putting the odd thing on a slant can be an interesting way to make the visuals more appealing, but this game way overuses this gimmick. The music is fine and complements the graphics, but it does get repetitive after a while, and if repetitive wasn't bad enough, all the tunes sound the same and drone into each other. So much for trying to find some positives. But at least the story in this game's got to be an improvement over the previous one, right? This game's story, like the previous entry in the series, is just a slideshow of images hinting or suggesting what this game's story is. There isn't even a few lines of text to help you out. I'm sure the manuals that came with these games' original packaging would have shed some light to both of these games' stories. But if you're like me, you most likely got this game years later as a loose cut. So unless someone posts this game's story from the manual online, you're out of luck in the story department, I'm afraid. Okay, so this game's story is no better than the previous one. I can live with that, I guess. I mean, most retro gamers would only play this game because it's a Christmassy themed platformer, but that does not excuse bad game design. And on that note, let's go back to collecting stars. Collecting stars to use on what you need is all fine and I'm sure well intended, but if you run out of them you're pretty much buggered in certain parts of this game, as you need them to double jump past certain sections. Some bits of this game you can get away with a well timed run and jump, but most of the time you will need that double jump. And provided you don't run out of stars to fuel the double jump, you still need to get the timing right. And once you've worked out the timing, the double jump is pretty easy to pull off when standing still, but trying to pull it off while moving is a challenge, and it will result in a lot of cheap deaths. And you know what else is cheap? Snowballs. When you jump on enemies as well as presents, you gain stars. But if you use this game's one and only limited time to power up, you don't gain any stars for the enemies you kill using the snowballs. So what's the point of using snowballs then? You need as many stars as you can get to help you through this game, and you cannot afford the luxury of snowballs. They do make your life easier for a moment, but at the expense of collecting stars. So apart from getting from A to B in each of these games' levels, are there any incentives? Well, there are presents to give to the kids you find, and based on the amount of kids you've given presents to, plus the time it took you to get to the end of each level, you get a rating from Santa in the form of a thumbs up, thumbs down, or something in the middle. What a silly way to rate something's performance. But seriously, Santa Claus JR Advance for the GBA is a pretty good looking first generation Game Boy Advance title, but that's where my praise for this game ends. Its story is no better than the previous one, and the gameplay feature of the stars, which this game is built around, is a joke. This game doesn't address any of the issues of the previous game and even adds some of its own, and because of that I have no choice but to give this game and this series a big huge thumbs down. But before we wrap up this video, let's talk a little about the series history and why stopping at 2 Santa Claus JR games was the best Christmas gift us richer gamers could receive. Both of these games were made by Neon Software. Now, Neon Software was formed in '93 and sold to Joe Wood in 2000. Before Joe Wood took over and funded Neon Software, they made many games, including the short-lived Santa Claus JR series. These games were released annually at Christmas for 2 consecutive years before the series bit the Christmas dust. I know in the past I've been a sucker for underdog games and promising series that met their end way too soon, but on this rare occasion I don't feel an ounce of sadness for the series. The first game was just nothing special, and the second game was a flawed attempt at trying to move this series forward. I have no desire for a third Santa Claus JR game, but out of curiosity, what are the chances of getting a third game? Pretty slim, I would say. In 2005, Joe Wood stopped funding Neon Software, which put them out of business. The management of Neon Software formed a new company called Keen Games. How very appropriate. Keen Games bought all the rights from the former company, including its name, so on the one hand the Santa Claus JR IP is still in the hands of an active company, but the chance of Keen Games making a third game is so remote. But if, and I mean a big if someone from Keen Games goes looking through their vaults and sees this series, please do us a favour and only make a third game if it's really good. Otherwise, leave this series to its eternal Christmassy slumber. Well, that wraps up my Santa Claus JR series review. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I wish you and your family a happy Christmas and stay safe this holiday season.